Hi, welcome to Teen Pride Book Talk. My name is Lucy, and this is the program on AADL TV, where each episode I take a few minutes to tell you about a book that is both representative of and inclusive of folks in the LGBTQIA+ community. The book that I'm going to be talking about today is a multi-genre anthology. It is called At Midnight, and it is edited by Dahlia Adler. The full title is At Midnight, 15 Beloved Fairy Tales Reimagined. This is an anthology of fairy tales that a lot of prominent YA authors have retold to make their own. There is a wide variety of voices in this book. There are many different approaches to the way that the authors reimagine these tales. There's a mix of genre, there's a mix of tone. One thing all of these stories indicate is that fairy tales really have the ability to metamorphosize. Like, we've all been hearing fairy tales all our lives that have been retold and changed and tweaked in little subtle ways and sometimes in big ways. So there is a fluidity to fairy tales, traditional fairy tales. And this fluidity really allows for these stories to be reimagined with a cast of characters that is much more representative than the original stories. Representative through race, sexuality, gender. And another thing that fairy tales seem to have in common is that many of them highlight an act of transformation. Something about somebody changes in the story in order to get to the end result. And so whether that's through magic or their physical appearance changes or otherwise, that is there in the traditional fairy tales, and in many of these stories that's really just highlighted. I'm going to tell you about a few of the stories. There were some standouts to me. One thing I also loved about this collection is that the original stories are included in the second half of the book, which is helpful because some of the fairy tales I was not familiar with, and it was interesting to then read the original and see how this particular author had changed it. The very first story in the book is called Sugar Plum, and this is by Anne-Marie McLemore, and it's based on The Nutcracker, of which Anne-Marie McLemore said, "Sugar plums, glittering snow, really snappy uniforms, fabulous shoes used as weapons. It's not like I had to make a huge leap, grand jeté, to make the Nutcracker gay." So this story is about a Latina girl who is forced to perform, actually forced by her father to dance at this party. And it's something that happens every year. And part of this girl's story is really dealing with microaggressions that are based on her race and performances that are forced to occur. There's also a part of the story that's sort of an enemies to lovers between two girls who see each other annually at a holiday party. It was really well done. I only know of the Nutcracker as going to see the ballet, so it was interesting to see this take on it as well. Another story that I really enjoyed reading was the story by Dahlia Adler, who is the editor of this collection, and that was called Say My Name, and it is based on Rumpelstiltskin, but Dahlia Adler really goes very far away from that story, and it has to do with this girl who is a coding genius in high school, and she will do anything to attract the attention of another girl that she has a crush on. It's all put into the online world because of this coding aspect of it. And as you can imagine, someone who might be willing to dive into some questionable behavior in order to attract someone that they like really has a wider opportunity to do that online. It's easier to hurt people if you don't have to interact with them in real life. And this story really takes some interesting turns in that direction. I had to reread Rumpelstiltskin in the back to sort of see how they were connected. And that really made me appreciate what Dahlia Adler had done with that. Dahlia Adler is a freelance writer. She's also written some young adult novels. She is an editor 3 times over now with this collection. She did a collection of similar stories based on the stories of Edgar Allan Poe. She did another anthology based on the plays of Shakespeare. She is also the founder of a website called LGBTQreads.com. And this website is such a good resource for finding books with LGBTQ characters or with writers or with characters with queer parents. You can always look up things by age. You can look at children's books. You can look middle grade. You can look young adult. You can look by genre. So you can look at fiction, you can look at romance, you can look at fantasy. There will be subgenres within the categories. So for instance, you'll have young adult by pairing. So who is pairing up in this book? Young adult by setting, young adult by where it takes place, like which state, young adult by trope, young adults with queer parents. So this is just within that one young adult bracket. This is done for everything, for fiction, for nonfiction, for children's, for middle grade, for poetry. And then these lists are cross-referenced in an entire other compendium just called representation. So you can look under age, you can look under body diversity, you can look under disability and neurodivergence. It's such a wonderful resource, and it really has familiarized me with Dahlia Adler, the author, and her works, and drew me to pick up this book. There are reviews on this site. It really is just a place to find book lists. One last story that I want to talk about in this book is the story by H.E. Edgman, and it's called Mother's Mirror, and it is based on the story of Snow White. And they use this story to discuss prejudice against trans teens. There is transphobia in this story. They also show the impacts that families can have on mental health and the ways that trans teens might view themselves in the world, the parallels between the characters, the way they use Snow White to then tell this story, which is completely different, but using the premise of the original fairy tale so well, is just really striking. And it's interesting to see how these themes of transphobia and mental health and finding your place in your family were shown through the lenses of the original personalities in the original stories. And this is not the only story that really does that. In fact, this is kind of what all of these stories are doing. They're taking the original lens of the traditional folktale, and they are presenting what they see differently. There are so many great authors in here. Melinda Lowe has a story in here. Darcy Littlebadger has a story in here. Alex London has a story that is a retelling of Cinderella. That's very good. And the list goes on. There are 15 total stories. And then, as I said, the original stories are also included, which even if you know the fairy tale, you think you know it very well, it is really interesting to have them right there next to each other to be able to see what these authors are doing and how they are subverting the original stories to tell you something new. So I had a lot of fun with this anthology. Anthologies, I think, are great to sort of pick up and dip in and out of. You can just read one piece at a time. They each stand alone. I highly recommend that you try At Midnight, which is edited by Dahlia Adler. Thanks for joining me.